They say it's the small things that go first. Names, keys, why you walked into a room. And at first I believed that. After all, I'm 79 years old. I've lived my whole life in El Paso, raised 3 children in the same house I grew up in, watched the desert sky change colors 1,000 times. I've seen the slow fade of old neighbors, the way age wears down even the proudest men. So when I started forgetting things, little things, I didn't panic. I thought it was just the sun getting to me, the heat making everything a little slower. It started one summer morning. I'd gone out early to sweep the patio, same as I always did, before the sun got too high. I remember setting the broom against the wall, going back inside to make cafe, then stepping out again, and the broom was gone. Not just moved, gone. I found it later in the laundry room, tucked behind the washer. I laughed at myself then, even told my comadre Lupita about it when we spoke on the phone later. She said, "Ay, Dolores, that's just age. Don't let it worry you." But it kept happening. I'd forget where I put my glasses, only to find them in the refrigerator. I'd write a grocery list and leave it on the kitchen table, then drive to Food King and realize I didn't remember a single item. Still, it wasn't alarming. Not yet. Not until the time I missed my own doctor's appointment. I had it written down on the calendar, circled in red, even set an alarm on the little digital clock my grandson gave me. But somehow the day came and went, and I didn't even notice. That's when the fear started to settle in. I'd sit on the bench outside our home and try to remember what I'd done that morning. Sometimes it came back in pieces, a coffee cup left half full, a song on the radio. Other times, there was just a blank space, like I'd skipped a page in a book and couldn't flip back. And Tomas, my husband of 53 years, would tell me I was just tired. "You've got too much on your mind," he'd say. "You worry too much." Maybe he was right. I'd been reading more about dementia lately. It runs in my cousin's family, and I'd seen what it did to her mother. I didn't want that for myself. I didn't want to forget the names of my grandchildren or the taste of pan dulce from the bakery on Zaragoza. I didn't want to lose the stories I'd carried all my life, the scent of my mother's hair, the way my father laughed when he danced. So I made an appointment. I told the doctor everything. He was kind, didn't rush me. After some tests, he called it mild cognitive decline. He said there was a medication that might help slow it down. I held that prescription in my hand like it was a lifeline. If I started early, maybe I could keep my memories. Maybe I could keep myself. I didn't know then that losing my memory wouldn't be the worst part. I didn't know what was coming. Dr. Alvarez had been my doctor for nearly 20 years. He was young when I first met him, just starting his practice on Alameda Avenue, a second-generation El Pasoan with a quiet voice and hands that always stayed still when you spoke. He never made me feel rushed, never brushed off my questions. That day, when I told him about the forgotten mornings and the misplaced broom, he didn't laugh. He just nodded, wrote a few things down, and asked if I'd noticed changes in my mood, if I'd ever felt disoriented at familiar places, if I still read books. "Yes," I said. "I read, but sometimes I forget what the book was about when I finish it." That seemed to strike a chord. He asked if I could remember the endings to the last few I read. I couldn't. I remembered the covers, even the characters, but the ending slipped through like dust through my fingers. He called it mild cognitive decline, said it was common. Not a sentence, not yet, just a sign. "You're still very sharp, Dolores," he said. "You caught this early. There's a medication that helps. It won't reverse it, but it can help you hold on to what's there." He handed me a prescription and put his hand gently on my shoulder. "It's a good thing you came in." I left the clinic that day with a strange mix of relief and dread. I was glad it had a name, but names come with weight. I kept the prescription in my purse for 2 days before I even looked at it again. It felt like an admission. that something inside me was slipping. Tomas didn't ask what the doctor said. He saw the bag from the pharmacy later and gave it a passing glance. "What's that for?" he asked as he stirred his cafe at the kitchen table. "Memory pills," I said, quiet. "For the forgetting." He didn't say anything for a long moment, then chuckled softly. "You don't forget. You just remember too much." I didn't know what that meant then. It sounded like a joke. I smiled because I didn't want to argue. That's how things were with Tomas. Keep it easy. Keep it calm. The pills were small pink ovals. I lined them up in a little glass dish next to my toothbrush. I started taking them each morning after brushing, after feeding the pigeons on the patio. And slowly, I felt something shift. Not overnight, but gradually. The fog began to lift. I could read a novella from start to finish and remember the ending. I remembered appointments, grocery lists, even where I'd set my coffee mug down. I felt steadier. I felt like myself again. But I also started watching myself more closely, not just for forgetting, but for when the forgetting returned. Because even then, I had a strange feeling, like something was waiting at the edge of all that clarity. Something I didn't have a name for yet. I've always been a creature of routine. It gives me peace, especially in a house like ours, built in the 50s, full of creaks and corners that shift with the desert wind. So when I started the medication, I made a ritual out of it. Every morning, after brushing my teeth, I'd walk to the kitchen window and pull open the thin lace curtain, letting the light spill across the tiled counter. My little wooden box sat there, the one Tomas carved decades ago during a winter when work was slow. Inside were my pill bottles, arranged by type and time. The memory pill went on the left, beside the small ceramic bowl where I kept my wedding ring whenever I washed dishes. I never took my pills without water and a prayer. A habit from my mother, who used to whisper, "Que me haga bien," before swallowing anything. May it do me good. That summer, I felt a little more whole each day. I'd walk to the mailbox without forgetting what I meant to send. I'd call Lupita in the afternoons and recount stories without losing the thread. I even found myself humming while folding laundry, songs I hadn't thought of in years. My mind felt like a garden beginning to bloom again, cautious but alive. Tomas didn't say much about it. He never asked if the pills were working. He'd watch me, though, from the kitchen table while I sliced fruit or read the obituaries aloud like I always did. Sometimes he'd offer one of those quiet grunts, the kind that used to mean agreement or disapproval. I could never quite tell which. We'd been married so long that silence had become a language. I didn't expect sweetness anymore. We hadn't danced in years, hadn't held hands since my last hospital stay. But we functioned. I cooked, he drove. We watched the local news and argued over whether the city council would ever fix the potholes on Dyer Street. It wasn't love like when we were young, but it was something familiar. One afternoon, I caught him staring at my pillbox, just staring. His hands were folded over his stomach, his mouth set in a line. I asked if something was wrong. He shook his head and stood up slowly, groaning like he always did, and left the room without a word. That night, I dreamed of my father. He was sitting in our old backyard shelling pecans, humming a song I couldn't quite place. In the dream, he looked up at me and said, "Remember what matters, mija." I woke up before dawn and stood by the kitchen window, watching the stars fade behind the mountains. I took my pill, swallowed it with a glass of water, and whispered, "Que me haga bien." And for the first time in a while, I believed it might. It was late July when I felt the first crack in the routine. The sun was already fierce by mid-morning, baking the sidewalks and humming through the windows like a restless spirit. I had planned to make arroz con pollo that day. Carla was supposed to come by with the boys, but when I opened the pantry, the rice was already cooked, the pot still warm on the stove. I stood there for what felt like minutes, trying to remember doing it. I couldn't. Not a single moment. The whole act, washing the rice, boiling it, was gone. I sat at the kitchen table and rubbed my temples. My mind felt soft around the edges, like a picture losing its frame. I went to check my pill box, and that's when I noticed it. The pill was still there, untouched. I stared at it, my heart starting to pick up speed. I was sure I had taken it. I always did. And yet there it sat, quietly defying me. When Tomas came in, I asked, trying to sound casual, "Did you see if I took my medicine this morning?" He didn't even look up from the newspaper. "Maybe you already did. You forget sometimes, mi amor." It was said so gently, so matter of fact, that I nearly believed him. Maybe I had taken it and forgotten that I did. That's what the doctor warned might happen, right? But still, something itched at the back of my mind. I began to notice it more often. Missing pills, foggy afternoons, phone conversations I swore I had that people claimed never happened. Once, I left the front door wide open. A neighbor knocked around noon to tell me. I hadn't even realized I'd gone outside. Each time it happened, I felt a little less certain of myself. I started keeping a small notebook by my bedside. I jotted down times I took my medicine, what I wore that day, who I spoke to. It was a way to hold on to something solid. But even then, there were gaps I couldn't explain. Tomas grew more insistent that I was forgetting too much. "You're getting worse, Dolores," he said once, when I couldn't remember if we'd paid the electric bill. "Maybe you need more help than that little pill can give you." I nodded, even though my hands were clenched tight in my lap. I didn't like the way he said it. Not the words themselves, but the way he looked at me when he did, like he was trying to make something true just by saying it out loud. One afternoon, I found him near my pill box, standing too close, his hands behind his back. I asked what he was doing. He smiled, slow and lazy. "Just checking the counter," he said, and walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. The heat clung to the walls, and the sound of the ceiling fan felt louder than usual. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the memory of his smile lodged deep in my chest. Something wasn't right. I just didn't know how much I was forgetting, or what. The morning it happened, the air was heavy with heat even before the sun came up. One of those El Paso days where the heat clings like a second skin, even in the shade. I'd woken up earlier than usual, disoriented again, my mouth dry and my thoughts slow. I went to the kitchen to take my pill, thinking maybe that would clear the fog. But when I reached for the bottle, I stopped cold. There was tape on it, clear packing tape, wound tightly around the cap, pressed smooth and neat, like someone had gone out of their way to seal it shut. I blinked at it, then touched it to be sure. It wasn't something I'd done. I never used tape for anything near the pills. I didn't even keep tape in that drawer. That kind of tape, thick and glossy, I'd seen it before. Tomas kept it in the garage, next to the boxes he used to send old parts and tools to his cousin in Las Cruces. I peeled it off slowly, hands trembling, and set it on the counter like it might explode. My heart beat so loud I could hear it in my ears. I took the pill with water, but it didn't sit right. My stomach churned. When Tomas came into the kitchen, I didn't say anything right away. I just watched him, watched the way he moved, casual, like nothing had happened. He poured his coffee, scratched at his neck, sat down at the table. I stood by the sink pretending to wash a dish that wasn't dirty. Then I asked, as quietly as I could manage, "Did you put tape on my medicine bottle?" He looked up, puzzled. "What?" "The pill bottle. This morning it was taped shut." He furrowed his brow, shook his head slightly. "Maybe you did it and forgot." There it was again. That line, that tone. He didn't say it with concern. He said it like it was already fact. Like the forgetting was now mine to carry, no matter what the truth was. I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly and turned back to the sink. But something inside me shifted then. It wasn't just doubt anymore. It was fear, a kind I hadn't known in all our years together. The kind that comes when your world, your sense of what's real, starts to tilt, and you realize the person who shares your bed may not just be watching you slip. He might be helping you fall. That night, I hid my pill bottle in the pantry behind the jar of dried chilies. I set a reminder on my old phone and took the pill after Tomas had gone to bed. I didn't tell anyone, not yet, but I began writing more. Not just times and dates, but thoughts, feelings, little details he might try to talk me out of later. Because if I didn't hold on to them, who would? And if I couldn't trust my own husband, what else had I forgotten that I shouldn't have? We moved into that house on Wyoming Avenue in the summer of 1972. I was 26, pregnant with our second child, and the neighborhood still had front yard fruit trees and open gates. Back then, El Paso felt smaller, quieter. I could walk to the bakery without locking the door behind me. Everyone knew each other's names. And Tomas, he was still soft around the edges then, still full of that boyish charm that made my sisters giggle when I brought him home for the first time. The house was modest. 2 bedrooms, stucco walls, a porch with the chipped paint we meant to fix, but never did. But it was ours. We raised our children there. We ate every Christmas meal at that same scuffed dining table. I kept the same embroidered curtains hanging in the kitchen, hand-stitched by my mother before she passed. Every tile, every crack in the wall held some memory, some version of who we had been. But over time, the years hardened things. Tomas changed after the layoff at the plant. He took small jobs, odd work, but something inside him went quiet. He became a man of few words, and those words lost their warmth. He didn't hit me, not then, not in any way someone would notice, but he stopped laughing, stopped touching, and I adjusted. Like women do, I filled the space with casseroles and laundry and grandchildren, with forgiveness. We buried friends, cried at baptisms, watched our daughter become a nurse and our sons move away. Time passed in long, slow layers. So when the forgetting began, I thought, maybe this is just what getting old looks like. Maybe we grow quieter because there's nothing left to say. Maybe this is how long love ends, not in fire, but in fog. But something about the tape on that bottle, the way Tomas had looked at me that morning, it wouldn't leave me. I thought about all the little bruises I'd brushed off as clumsiness, the way he sometimes gripped my arm when I spoke too loud at church, the way he rolled his eyes when I tried to join the community garden last spring, muttering something about not making a fool of yourself. And then there were the things he'd said in the middle of the night, mumbled words, sometimes sharp, sometimes strange. Once I'd heard him say, "You're not going to start this again." I wasn't even awake before that moment. What was he responding to? 53 years in that house, in that life, had taught me to overlook the cracks, to patch them with silence. But now those cracks felt wide, dangerous, like I was walking through my own home and didn't know what waited around each corner. I began to wonder, had he always been this way? Or had I only now begun to see him clearly? Either answer scared me. It's a strange thing pretending to forget. You'd think it would be easy. At my age, forgetting is expected. But to fake it on purpose, to turn your mind into a performance, that takes effort. It takes watching yourself like a stranger might, listening to your own voice with suspicion. I started small. I'd ask questions I already knew the answers to. Did we go to the store yesterday? Or did Carla call? Tomas would always answer quickly, too quickly, like he'd been waiting for the chance. "No," he'd say. "You're thinking of last week." Or, "You already talked to her, don't you remember?" And I'd nod like I believed him. But I was writing everything down, every detail, every word I could recall. I kept the notebook in the back of my dresser drawer under an old rosary. I used the dates as anchors, marked what I wore, what I ate, anything that might help me pin memory to fact. I even began drawing little circles around things I wanted to remember twice, like the bruise that bloomed on my upper arm one morning after we argued about money, or the limp I woke up with after I told him I was thinking of joining the choir again. That bruise, I remembered the argument. I remembered his face tightening, his voice getting low, the way he grabbed my arm too hard. But when I woke up, confused and sore, he acted like nothing had happened. "You must have bumped into something," he said, even as I stared at the dark, thumb-shaped mark. Another time, I deliberately moved my pill bottle from the wooden box to the cabinet above the sink, just to see what would happen. The next morning, it was back in the box, exactly in its place. I hadn't put it there. I knew I hadn't. I began to notice the way Tomas would hover near me, especially when I was near the pills. Sometimes he'd sit at the table with a book he wasn't reading. Other times, he'd linger just outside the kitchen, pretending to fix the thermostat that didn't need fixing. Watching. Always watching. The hardest part wasn't the fear. It was the doubt. There were moments when I wondered if I was being cruel, if I was making something out of nothing. But every time that guilt crept in, I'd look at the notebook. I'd see my own handwriting, the details I couldn't have imagined, the pills I was sure I'd missed, the days I felt like a shadow in my own home. One night, after I wrote down an especially bad day, he'd yelled, slammed a door, left me shaking. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My eyes looked unfamiliar, older, not just from age, but from something else, from knowledge, from the weight of pretending not to know what I knew all too well. That night, I said aloud in the dark, "He thinks I'm already gone." But I wasn't. Not yet. It was a Tuesday morning when I woke up limping, the kind of limp that comes from a deep bruise. Something pulled, something strained. My left knee ached with every step, and my hip felt like it had been twisted wrong in my sleep. At first, I thought maybe I'd fallen during the night, but there were no scrapes, no broken lamps, or pillows out of place. Just the pain, heavy and quiet. Tomas didn't ask what was wrong when he saw me moving slower than usual. He just watched me shuffle to the sink, then went back to his crossword. That silence, the kind that pretends not to notice, spoke louder than anything. I sat down on the couch and tried to recall the day before. The notebook helped. I'd written about a small argument, nothing dramatic. I'd brought up the church again, said I wanted to start going back on Sundays. He'd frowned and said, "It's not safe, not with how you forget things." He told me I'd get lost, embarrass myself. I'd said I wasn't a child. He said, "You're not far from one, the way you've been acting." I remembered the way his jaw clenched, the way he took a step forward, too fast, too close. But after that, the page went blank. I hadn't written anything else. I didn't remember anything else. That terrified me. I checked the pill bottle. The count was off again, one fewer than there should have been. I knew it. I always counted now. I had started marking the bottom of each capsule with a tiny dot of red pen. They were disappearing even when I was sure I'd taken them. And now the limp. I touched my knee and winced. It wasn't an accident. My body was telling me something my mind couldn't reach. A bruise is a kind of memory, and even if he wouldn't admit it, even if I couldn't say it out loud yet, I knew this pain had been given to me, not stumbled into. I spent the rest of the day in a quiet rage, not shouting, not crying, just watching. Watching Tomas water the plants outside like nothing was wrong, watching him whistle low under his breath while he folded his newspaper. Watching the man I had built a life with pretend I was disappearing. That evening, after he went to bed, I stood in the doorway of our room and stared at his sleeping form, the shape of his back under the covers, the rise and fall of his breath, and I thought, if he really loved me, why was I afraid to sleep beside him? I turned and walked down the hall, knee throbbing, and slept on the couch that night. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, and in that cold, dim room I wrote 5 words into my notebook, circled twice in red ink. This limp did not lie. The basement was always Tomas's space. I hardly went down there anymore, not because I couldn't, but because over the years it had become his domain. Tools lined the pegboard, old paint cans sat stacked in the corners, and the air always smelled faintly of oil and dust. Still, something kept tugging at me that morning, a quiet insistence in my chest. I'd been counting the pills again, checking the notebook, and things still weren't adding up. Capsules vanished without explanation. Days blurred even when I knew I'd taken every precaution. And now the limp, the tape, the bruises I hadn't remembered getting. So I waited until Tomas left to pick up a part for the swamp cooler. He was gone maybe 30 minutes, just long enough. I opened the creaky basement door and descended slowly, one hand gripping the railing. The stairs groaned under my feet. The light switch clicked, casting a dim yellow glow over the cluttered room. It felt colder down there, like the house had exhaled something it didn't want me to find. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. I opened drawers, checked old coffee tins filled with nails, moved dusty boxes of Christmas ornaments we hadn't used in years. Nothing felt out of place, but nothing felt right either, until I saw it. Behind the furnace, wedged between a folded lawn chair and a rusted cooler, was an old Café Bustelo tin. I recognized it immediately. Tomas had kept it for years, said he liked the design. It used to sit on his workbench with spare screws inside, but when I pulled it out and lifted the lid, I froze. Pills. Dozens of them. My pills. Neatly tucked inside, still marked with my tiny red pen dots, proof I hadn't imagined a thing. They were all there. Capsules I'd counted and accounted for. All the ones I thought I'd taken. The ones that should have been in me, helping me stay sharp. I sat down on the concrete floor, holding that tin in my lap. My knees ached from the cold, but I didn't move. My breath came slow and shallow, like I was underwater. I felt every single year of my life in that moment. He hadn't just been careless. He hadn't just been trying to help. He had been stealing my medication, day by day, weakening me, making me question my mind, making me small. He was trying to erase me. I sat there for a long time, tin clutched to my chest, heart pounding louder than the silence. There had been bruises, confusion, fear, all of it tied to what I had been told I was imagining, all of it real. He was building a version of me that couldn't fight back. But I had found the evidence. I wasn't imagining anything. I wasn't lost. And as I climbed those basement stairs, tin in hand, something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. Not anymore. The morning I confronted him, the air in the kitchen felt heavier than usual, like it knew what was coming. I set the tin on the table between us. No words at first, just the metal can, scarred and silent, sitting like a third presence. Tomas glanced at it, then looked at me, eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "You tell me," I said, my voice calm but steady. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I watched his hands, how they stilled, how they tightened around his coffee cup. He didn't reach for the tin. He didn't deny what it was. Instead, he leaned back, let out a sigh like a man who had been caught speeding but thought the officer might let him go with a warning. "I didn't want you getting upset," he said finally. "You get so worked up over things. You don't always remember clearly, Dolores. I was just trying to keep things calm. The words settled over the table like ash. I stared at him, my heart knocking inside my chest. By taking my pills? I asked. By making me think I was losing my mind? You don't understand, he said. You don't know how you get. Some days you cry over nothing. You bring up things that didn't happen. You forget we even talked about them. And when I try to explain, you scream. You scare yourself. I shook my head. No, Tomas, you scare me. That stopped him. He looked at me for the first time that morning, not with defiance, not with pity, but with something else. Maybe shame, maybe disbelief. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I've been keeping a journal, I continued, writing everything down, times, dates, conversations. And I found the pills, every single one you took from me. You wanted me confused. You wanted me forgetful. You wanted me quiet. It wasn't like that, he muttered, but the heat was gone from his voice. Yes, I said, louder this time. It was exactly like that. The truth sat between us, thick and undeniable. 53 years of marriage peeled back in a single conversation. He didn't argue further. He just looked away, stared at the toaster like it might tell him what to do. For a long time, neither of us moved. I watched the sunlight shift across the tiles, the shadows lengthen. I need space, I said finally. I'm going to stay with Carla for a few days. He didn't answer, didn't try to stop me, just nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if conceding to a loss he never expected. I left the tin on the table, let him sit with it. As I packed a small bag that afternoon, I felt a strange calm. Not peace exactly, but clarity. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't weak. He had tried to make me vanish, but I remembered everything now. The next morning, I sat in Dr. Alvarez's office, the tin can resting on my lap like a secret finally spoken. He looked at the pills, at the dates I'd written down in my notebook, columns of times, markings, the red dots I had carefully inked onto each capsule before they disappeared. He didn't say much at first, just flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. His brow furrowed the way it did when something made him angry, but he didn't want to let it show. Dolores, he said gently, this isn't forgetfulness. This is manipulation. I looked down at my hands, folded tightly in my lap. So I'm not? You're not losing your mind, he said firmly. What you've described, it has a name. It's called gaslighting. I'd heard the word before, maybe on the news or in one of Carla's medical magazines, but I'd never known what it meant. I asked him, and he explained. When someone deliberately makes you question your memory, your perception, even your sanity, it's a form of abuse, subtle, quiet, but real. I nodded slowly. The word settled into my bones like an answer I hadn't known I needed. Gaslighting. That's what it was. Every moment I doubted myself, every time I reached for a memory and came back with nothing. It hadn't been age. It had been control. He gave me a list of resources, circled the number of a counselor he trusted. But more than that, he gave me validation. He believed me. That mattered more than I could explain. After I left his office, I stopped by the small branch library on Isleta. I wanted to read more, to understand. The librarian, a kind woman with graying hair and thick glasses, showed me where to look. I sat in a corner with a thin paperback and a stack of articles printed from the internet. Story after story echoed mine. Women who'd spent years being told they were imagining things, only to discover they weren't alone. I wasn't alone. That night back at Carla's house, I told her everything. We sat on her porch, the desert wind moving softly through the mesquite trees. She listened without interrupting, her eyes glassy. When I was done, she reached for my hand. "Mama," she whispered. I always had a strange feeling about him these past few years. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to ask. We cried, both of us, not just for what had happened, but for the years that had passed under the weight of silence. She promised me we'd figure out what came next, together. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without waking in fear. The next morning, I took my pill from a bottle I kept in Carla's locked bathroom cabinet. No tape, no games, just a quiet moment of truth. I wasn't crazy. I had a name for it now. And with that name came power. In the days that followed, Carla became my anchor. She rearranged her work schedule at the hospital, made sure I was never alone too long, and brought home takeout from that little pupuseria we used to love when the kids were small. She didn't press me with questions. She let me talk when I wanted, and when I didn't, she just sat close, her presence steady. One evening, while she chopped vegetables in the kitchen and I sat at the small table with my notebook, I realized how long it had been since I'd felt safe in my own home. Not just physically, but emotionally. It had been years, maybe decades. I looked at her and said, "I kept it all quiet because I didn't want to make trouble." She didn't stop chopping. "You were surviving, Mama. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how." That truth settled deep into me. All my life, I had believed silence was a kind of strength, that if I endured, things would get better. That if I didn't name the hurt, maybe it would stay small, but it hadn't. It had grown in the dark, fed by all the years I told myself things weren't that bad. We made a plan together. No shouting, no confrontations, just quiet, careful steps. Carla found an assisted living complex just off Scenic Drive. Bright rooms, friendly staff, close enough that she could visit after work. It wasn't a nursing home. I wasn't being put away. I was choosing something new. The day we drove back to the house to collect my things, I felt a strange stillness in my chest. Tomas wasn't home. Carla called ahead to make sure. I moved through each room methodically, packed my favorite shawl, my rosary, a few framed photos of the children when they were little. I didn't take everything. I didn't want to. I paused in the kitchen. The wooden box was still on the counter, the same place it had always been. The tape was gone now. The pill bottle sat perfectly upright, full, untouched. He knew. I didn't take the pills. I didn't touch the box. I left it there like a question he'd never get to ask. Back at Carla's, we unpacked quietly. She helped me settle into the guest room until my apartment would be ready. That night, we watched a telenovela on the couch, her feet tucked under a blanket, her head resting against my shoulder. I thought of all the years I'd spent keeping my hurt wrapped tight, folded into the corners of a marriage that had long since stopped feeling like home. And now here I was, starting again, not as a wife or a victim, but as myself. I lost a husband, but I hadn't lost everything. I still had my name, and I still had my mind. Moving day came quietly, just as we'd planned. No big announcement, no drama. Carla helped me fold the last of my sweaters into a suitcase, and my grandson Miguel carried the heavier boxes out to his truck. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Franklin Mountains, painting the sky in muted pinks and golds. It was a soft morning, the kind that made you feel like change might be gentle after all. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell Tomas where I was going. We'd already said everything that needed saying. The truth sat between us now, cold and permanent. If he wanted peace, he could sit in the silence he had built for himself. The assisted living apartment was smaller than our house, but it felt brighter. My room had a wide window that looked out onto a garden where residents grew tomatoes and herbs. The walls were freshly painted, the bed firm and clean. There were soft chairs in the common room, a little chapel down the hall, and a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and coffee. Carla stayed with me the first few hours, helping me put away books and set my framed photos on the dresser. She filled the shelves with my favorite novellas, hung up my rosary on the wall. When it was time for her to leave, she kissed my forehead and said, "Call me anytime. I'll be here before dinner tomorrow." When the door closed behind her, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle. Not the stifling quiet of my old house, but a new kind, peaceful, open, still. Later that day, one of the nurses came in to check on me. Her name was Marta. She spoke softly, called me Señora, and offered to help me unpack the last of my clothes. I told her I could manage, and she smiled. "I can already tell you're the independent type." I smiled back, maybe more than I knew. That night, I stood by the window and watched the lights of El Paso flicker below. The streets I'd known for 79 years were still there, familiar, unchanged, but the woman looking out at them was not the same. I'd spent so much of my life tending to others, folding my truth beneath duty and devotion. But now, I was beginning again, on my own terms, with clarity, with purpose. No one had to know the full story, not the other residents, not the staff, but I knew it, and that was enough. I had walked through confusion, through fear, through betrayal cloaked in love, and come out the other side. I unpacked my journal last, placed it in the drawer beside my bed, and then I slept, deep and unafraid. It's funny what you remember once the noise is gone. Now, each morning, I wake to the soft knock of Marta bringing my café con leche. I open the curtains myself. No rush, no shadows in the corners of my mind. I sit by the window and watch the sun climb above the mountains, slow and golden. The sky here in El Paso always did feel too big to hold all the things I once carried. I still take my pills every day, but now I do so without second-guessing myself. No tape, no missing capsules. I keep them in a simple case on my nightstand, beside the clock and my prayer card. I still whisper the words my mother used to say, "Que me haga bien," let it do me good. And for the first time in years, I believe it truly does. Carla visits often, sometimes with Miguel, sometimes with the little ones. She brings photos, stories from work, fresh tamales from the market on Montana. We laugh more than we used to. I catch her watching me sometimes, like she's still afraid I might disappear. I reassure her the only thing I've lost is the weight of silence. Sometimes, when I sit out in the garden and feel the desert breeze touch my face, I let myself remember. Not to dwell, not to hurt, just to see it clearly. I remember the way Tomas used to whistle when he watered the yard. I remember the sound of the screen door in the summer and the way the kitchen smelled when he made his Sunday eggs. I remember the early years, when we danced in the living room and dreamed of taking a train to California. There were good days, but I also remember the fear, the cold taping of a pill bottle, the bruises, the lies spoken with kindness, the long, slow erosion of trust. I remember it all, and that's what matters. Because remembering is a kind of resistance, a quiet reclaiming. Every page in my notebook, every dot on every capsule, that was me refusing to vanish, refusing to be rewritten. Some people ask if I feel lonely now. I don't. I feel steady. I feel known to myself, if to no one else. And in the gentle hush of evening, when the sky over El Paso turns violet and gold, I sit by my window, cup in hand, and smile to myself. I survived the forgetting. I saved my mind. And in doing so, I found the part of me I had given away piece by piece, year after year, thinking love demanded it. I was wrong. Love doesn't erase you. Real love remembers.